This is your classroom. This is your world. But how does what you're learning here relate to what's happening out there? And how might these issues affect you today and tomorrow? Time to find out. I'm your host, Simon Jackson, and class starts right now. Canada is at a crossroads. Trade wars, shooting wars, climate change, biodiversity loss, division and disruption, and democratic decline. The world and its problems are becoming more complicated by the day, and the corresponding challenges facing our nation aren't getting any easier.
I think we're in an era of polycrisis or, perpetual crisis.
Worldwide, we're in big trouble.
The world is not necessarily a pretty place. We could hope that it will be one day, but getting there is rough.
There is no question the world's at an inflection point right now.
I believe we're at a really important crossroads.
I think we're at the crossroads. And I think one way to go is for community, and the other is for self.
How do we safeguard and grow our economy? How do we create jobs and bring down the cost of living in an era of mass change? How do we do that while also navigating the dual threats of climate change and biodiversity loss? Environmental issues for sure, but also very much economic and cultural challenges as well. Each of these issues, if not complex enough, must also account for growing divides in our society. Cultural divides, language divides, geographic divides, economic divides, political divides. And they must also be addressed in a more dangerous, less democratic world. Maybe you think these aren't hard challenges. The solutions are obvious. Yet nothing is as easy as we assume it should be, in part because even when we think problems are black and white, good versus evil, they rarely are. Almost every issue is maddeningly complex, made all the more difficult when emotions like uncertainty, anger, hopelessness, and fear are added to the mix. Which isn't to say that we're without options. There are ideas. There are always ideas. But are they complete ideas? Are our best and brightest focused not only on the crises of today, but also those of tomorrow? Are our decision makers balancing the needs of today with those of your tomorrow? These are the questions. And speaking of questions, maybe you've got one about now. Like, is Canada really at a crossroads? Are our problems actually that bad? And do we really need to tackle all of these issues right now and all at once? So, here's the thing.
This may be a real pivot point in the future of the country.
We cannot afford to be smug in Canada.
One thing after another that's kind of hitting us from the outside, sometimes from the inside of our country, but usually from the outside, by a world that is in turmoil. It's natural disasters, and it's the advent of artificial intelligence, the rise of authoritarianism and so forth. And it's all very disruptive, and I don't think we have a choice but to look at it all at the same time.
But it's also a chance for Canada to really step back and have another look at how we do things. And that certainly includes our approach to nature and the environment.
And I think that right now Canada is in a really interesting opportunity to talk about community and to be a community.
It's just hard to figure out how to move forward.
The only way to address a wicked problem is to get people to work together.
It's not easy. It requires a lot of work and a lot of collaboration. But I do think that we have the fiber as a country to be able to do that.
It's up to us. It is not up to a government. If we are not participating, if we do not assume our responsibilities, I don't care if you come from a town of 3 or the town of 4 million. I just think that we have to figure out how we can work together now, especially.
Canada, for much of Confederation, has mostly decided to stand against something. And so often, that something is America. We've become smug, and we've been more than content to skate by, rather than skate ahead. But that isn't going to cut it anymore. Whether we're talking about the health of our democracy, our economy, or our environment, our advantages have slowly eroded. And now, the problems are mounting. They're becoming more complex. They're becoming more interconnected. They demand a decision. They require courage. As a country, we must stand for something. We must uncover a set of ideals that can bring us together and move us forward now more than ever. This challenge, it's going to require every Canadian of every age to step up and use their own unique skills to look at each problem from a new perspective. It's going to require each of us to step outside of our comfort zones and overcome our natural biases in order to really understand our entire system, our entire ecosystem. After all, only by really listening and learning can we create a better tomorrow. And tomorrow, very soon, it will be your today. That's why this class isn't just theory. It's not abstract. This class is the foundation for understanding real issues in the real world. It's designed to help you take what you're learning and apply it to the challenges we face as a country and as a world. And maybe you think, I'm in school, I can't do this. But here's where you need to stop and think again.
The younger generation, I think, has a finely tuned sense of the dangers that the world is in, but they also have their hands on the potential solutions.
It's not an expectation that people will do the right thing or that good things will happen. It's in the knowledge that if they choose to, they can.
Our country's only as great as the people that step up to help make it great.
One of the most powerful things that young people can do is talk about ideas. And I think young people don't realize how powerful their voices are. They have way more power than they think they do. And part of participating well in a democracy is to shape, not only to be shaped. And you can shape, and that's your power.
Our most influential and impactful ideas will come from young people today who are growing up in this world.
Exactly. Or put another way,
Young people are always made for the moment that they are born into.
Ilona Doherty is a social innovator and Canada's leading researcher on, well, you. And as she explains,
Young people's brains are literally wired to be bold problem solvers and to come up with solutions to complex problems. Their brains are wired to do that. So young people today, from about 15 to 25, we're at the height of our creativity. We're at the height of our desire to experiment and try new things. We are more observant than when we're either younger or older. There's all these incredible abilities that we have until about 24.
so if you have the creativity, and you do, and if the challenges we face today will impact your future, and they will, why not help us chart a newer, better path forward? For you, for your family and friends, for our country, and for our world. Right, Ilona?
Young people are more able to deal with complexity and to figure out problems in a way that as we get older, we just aren't able to do as much.
You have the ability to see the forest for the trees. You have the ability to understand what so many of us have looked past. Like this. And what is this? It's a marten. A what? A marten, a medium-sized, ridiculously cute member of the weasel family. And like all members of the mustelid or weasel family, it's fast, it's smart, and it's more than capable of surviving in this unforgiving wilderness. And don't forget, this wilderness, your classroom, it's home to much bigger animals. Animals that should give the marten a run for its money. We're talking wolves and grizzlies and cougars and lynx and wolverines and even moose and elk because while their teeth aren't that big, these things, on a big body like this one, they can do a lot of damage, especially when you're about the size of a skateboard. Despite its small stature, the marten has carved out a successful life in this vast, harsh world. Its territory is massive relative to its size, and it is one of the 7 fiercest predators to call this place home. Sound a bit like Canada? It should. We're small in stature but rich in geography. We're a G7 nation that has used ingenuity to build a prosperous society on a land that many might interpret as cold and barren.
We certainly are a nation of innovators. Think about the history of the country. I mean, we had Indigenous people who were very, very self-reliant, and then we had a whole pioneer culture, and we've had wave after wave of immigration come into the country. So it means we're tough. We are tough.
This is what has allowed us to find our footing as a country and grow. But if we're being honest, what's allowed us to excel? A bit of good fortune.
We lived on the doorstep of the world's biggest market. So why would you load your widgets onto a ship in Halifax or in Vancouver when you can pop it on a truck or a train and sell it to the biggest market in the world?
Not only have we benefited hugely from our proximity to the US, we've also decided to deeply connect our nations.
We're a large country with a population kind of in a ribbon around the US border. So a lot of our infrastructure, whether it's pipelines, whether it's electricity, whether it's other things, tends to be north-south.
The benefit?
After World War II, and particularly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the world has enjoyed the most tremendous period of wealth creation, poverty reduction, general stability that we've seen in global history.
At least in this park, the marten has benefited from a bit of good luck too. You know the saying, one person's garbage is another person's treasure? Yeah, the marten takes this concept to the next level. While the marten can hunt, hunting requires calories. And calories, it's always better to acquire them than to spend them. And guess who loves to toss away a few free calories? We do. Whether it's a moose hit by a car or one too many hamburgers cooked for the old picnic, we're constantly throwing away food. throwing away our scraps. The marten, it's not one to pass up a free meal, especially given its size. And while the human-marten relationship is far from perfect, from the marten's perspective, it sure beats time-consuming small-time squirrel chasing or having to forge give-and-take security relationships with other species. After all, humans do much of the hard work for the marten for free. So yeah, it's true, the martens here, they've taken full advantage of their proximity to humans and have picked up a few bad habits along the way, which again sounds a lot like Canada.
Canada has become a laggard on defense and security and NATO. We became what's termed a free rider. We rode on the fact that, hey, the US are our buddies. They have the world's most powerful military by a factor of 10. We don't have to meet our commitments to NATO. We don't have to spend 2% of our GDP on defense. We don't have to maybe buy that new submarine. We'll buy an old used one and, patch it together with duct tape.
But we've not just become complacent about our security. Like our marten friends, we've become complacent on a lot of fronts.
We are in a very tricky situation right now.
To understand why, we thought we'd start with the basics, turning to one of Canada's most trusted voices on the economy and economic issues, Heather Schofield.
The economy is kind of a vague term. You can certainly throw an awful lot of things in that bucket, but I'd say for me, it means having a job, being able to afford the things that you want, being able to put your shoulders to the wheel and do hard work and be rewarded for it, and paying taxes so that you have the things that society wants. So we're talking about quality of life here.
And for our economy to be functioning, for our nation to be prosperous, we need to grow.
It's not just a static thing. The economy is living and breathing all the time, and you'd hope that it's getting bigger because, some of the problems that we're concerned about as a society, the environment, poverty, everybody having a nice place to live, all of those problems are solvable, but they're even easier to solve if you've got an economy that's growing at the same time. When your economy stops growing, that means you've got to make some really, really tough choices.
And guess what?
Our economy is growing, but barely.
How has this happened?
It's been, I'd say, probably 20 years of low productivity here. That's what we're talking about.
Productivity, oh God, I know what you're thinking, so boring. But it's not. To understand why Canada is in trouble, we really need to understand this issue.
It's a word that's hard to digest, but what it really means is that while other countries around the world, especially in the United States, where they were, taking leaps and bounds ahead in terms of applying technology and getting better at making more with less, we just kind of held steady.
Why has this problem been allowed to fester? Heather says.
Some of it comes down to our aversion to risk. We see that at all levels. I mean, the thing is with risk, there's high reward, but you could also lose. And I don't think that willingness to fail is not necessarily something that we've embraced as a country.
Celebrated angel investor and technology entrepreneur Randall Howard agrees.
There's a saying sometimes that in Canada we have a culture that's risk averse. Sometimes it's called go for bronze. And so I think a lot of that productivity issue is a sense that maybe we don't have to try as hard. Maybe life is too comfortable.
In fairness, why deal with this when you can just deal with this? If life is going well, there's really a good reason to rock the garbage can, right? Well, when any species becomes habituated to something easy, something unnatural, problems can begin. Right, Heather?
We've developed a kind of a complacency because life is pretty good, or it has been. But when we're hitting a troubled patch like we are right now, then it means we don't have a heck of a lot to fall back on.
That's the issue. As conservative strategist and demographics expert Hamish Marshall explains, issues like productivity seem like dry economics until it starts impacting our daily lives.
Most surveys show that something like 50% of Canadians are within $200 of not being able to pay a big bill or get through the month. That creates a massive level of anxiety.
Here's the funny thing about humans. We often don't understand societal problems until they're full-blown tire fires. The economy, it didn't become a crisis overnight, but we failed to heed the warnings of economic nerds. Canada, as you now understand, has had economic issues for years. Then COVID hit. That cost money, big money. It also changed how we work and what we buy. COVID, labor shifts, and changing purchasing habits all impacted supply chains. So too did natural disasters. The consequence? Inflation. The price of food went up. Affordable housing, a long-standing problem in Canada, became even harder to find. What was considered a temporary problem became worse and worse as fewer and fewer people were able to fill the jobs to meet the demand that was crippling the supply chains. Temporary workers were brought in to ease that problem, but these workers also needed housing, and that just made the housing problem more acute. Meanwhile, because of productivity issues, no one wanted to invest in Canada, so wages weren't keeping pace with inflation, and because inflation kept steady, suddenly Canada has a cost of living crisis on its hands. But again, it wasn't sudden. It just seemed sudden because we allowed problem after problem to compound until a lot of bad luck finally turned that problem into a very real, very tangible crisis.
Economically, it's harder. It's harder to rent an apartment, move out of your parents' house. Like all of this stuff is way harder than it used to be.
If this all sounds bad, guess what? It might get a whole lot worse. You see, while Canada was busy going for bronze, it was also putting most of its economic eggs in one neighboring nation-state basket. Like the marten, the strategy of taking advantage of geography and proximity to a massive economic market makes sense. The forest, sure, it offers a diversity of natural prey that, in times of food scarcity, will give the marten more options for survival. But it also offers risk. And risk, it can be dangerous. But it's also risky to put all of your eggs in one basket. Because if something changes, if that sweet supply of garbage gets cut off or suddenly becomes more dangerous in its own right, well, that will pose an even bigger risk for the marten. And here's the thing about change. It's constant. Nothing good lasts forever. The same holds true for Canada. The good old days of solely relying on America?
Those days are gone.
We're hitting some rough times with the United States putting up tariffs against us, putting them up, taking them down, putting them up, taking them down.
As a business person, you cannot respond to chaos in a constantly changing environment.
The on-again, off-again tariffs U.S. President Donald Trump is imposing on Canada and so many nations around the world has thrown the global economy into a state of turmoil. To recap, a tariff is a tax imposed on imported goods. It's a mechanism that exists to help countries protect specific industries and the jobs they create by making similar goods and services from other countries more expensive. The tariff is paid by whoever is doing the importing, usually businesses, but the tariff's costs are usually passed along to the consumer because, well, businesses are in the business of making money. If the tariff works, the consumer will change their buying habits, purchasing tariff-free products presumably made within their country's borders instead of the now more expensive imported version. In theory, at least. Sometimes, of course, tariffs make products cheaper than the out-of-country alternatives, but not cheaper than what the consumer had previously been paying before the tariffs were imposed. After all, the reason global free trade exists is because it's often cheaper to produce a good or service in a different country. Though Trump's goal is to create more American jobs and create a stronger domestic economy that allows his government to tackle the U.S. cost of living crisis without raising taxes, it remains to be seen if he'll be successful. But what's almost certain is that in trying to help his voter base, he will destabilize our economy. How? Well, for starters, remember Canada is, more than anything, a trading nation. Sure, we produce a few final products, but for the most part, we have the raw resources and specific skills that contribute to a larger vision that's packaged elsewhere, like in the US. In fact, the United States is by far our largest trading partner, and so many jobs in our country, directly or indirectly, are related to the goods we exchange with American businesses. A tariff on Canadian goods means what we sell to America becomes more expensive. That means Americans will be less likely to buy our products, reducing demand for what we make. With less demand, Canadian businesses will need fewer workers. That means layoffs and unemployment, sure, but it also means less government revenue and declining social services, worsening problems like the cost of living crisis. But wait, there's more. As demand dips for Canadian products, business investment will further dry up. That in turn means that the Canadian dollar will lose value. And since we don't make that much stuff to begin with, what we buy from, say, the United States will cost way more since our dollar will have so much less value than that of America's. This won't just increase the cost of living, but it will also make it more expensive for companies that rely on imports to do business in Canada. That means even more layoffs and more business closures. As each problem makes other problems worse, our economy will worsen, further hurting investment in Canada, further weakening the loonie, further driving inflation, further hurting prosperity. You get the picture. It's not pretty.
There are huge risks. 77% of our trade is with one country, the United States of America. So if that market is closed for a long period of time, we're going to have to very quickly diversify.
Will the American market be closed for the long term? President Trump has demanded that Canada spend significantly more on national security, arguing, like the marten, we've been a moocher for too long. He's also called our border lax, even though less than 1% of all drugs entering America flow across Canada's border. But even if both issues are tackled to Trump's liking, there's every chance these are smokescreens. It's very possible the Trump government is using artificial emergencies to circumnavigate the checks and balances of the US Congress. After all, pursuing a trade war with Canada or other nations allows his government to collect money for US services without raising taxes directly on the US people. If destabilizing the global economy ultimately drives up the cost of living for Americans, or costs them jobs, or even their homes, well, he can always fudge the truth and blame other countries. While Trump might not last in the Oval Office for the long term, his political brand and supporters might yet stick around for a while. And both Trump and his supporters have made it clear that Canada has what America craves: oil, water, and critical minerals. If by pulling back from free trade, the US can put Canada into an economic tailspin, well, it's possible Trump and his champions will be able to pursue their wish of annexing our nation, making America more self-reliant in a destabilized world that they've enabled.
As a patriot, I can't stand this 51st state taunting from the US president. So what we have to do is not react emotionally to it. We have to stand up for ourselves, but also push back in strategic ways.
In other words, the garbage can is now sealed. We can't bank on a free meal anymore. And we might not even be able to count on the US being a friendly neighbor. The rules have changed. Everything is about to get much harder.
The United States has been our, obviously our biggest trading partner and best friend in the world for a very long time. And suddenly they're picking on us for no discernible reason. And I think a lot of people are confused by this, that this is happening. And that as a result, they're scared.
This uncertainty and this kind of sense of betrayal around the U.S. is very sad and very frustrating. But as Canadians, we must embrace it. So it's a wake-up call.
We've got to try probably a lot harder and do some very hard strategic thinking as a country about, okay, what do we have that the world wants? We have a lot that the world wants, but how are we really going to make the most of that?
Canada needs to be more diversified instead of just reflexively and instinctively tied at the hip with the U.S. We need to have Plan B, Plan C to trade and work with other nations in this large global world.
We're a G7 country. We're a leader. We were in both world wars before the Americans because we're willing to step up and stand up for things that we believe in.
But what do we all believe in? How and where do we want to lead? Answering these questions while trying to overcome a cost of living crisis about to be made worse by a trade war will be tough. But these aren't the only issues that we need to grapple with. Something the Martin understands only too well. It's time to look beyond the forest. It's time to look up, way up.
Robson Glacier is one of the iconic glaciers we have in Western Canada.
Dr. Brian Menounos is a scientist and one of the world's leading glaciologists. Why study glaciers?
These are important frozen reservoirs that store water and really kind of release that water in latest summer when seasonal snowpack has been depleted. They also provide a cool buffering capacity.
So in other words, the Robson Glacier stores water, releases it when the ecosystem requires moisture, and helps regulate the overall climate for animals like, you guessed it, the marten. But everything isn't swell with the Robson Glacier, as Brian explains.
The amount of water coming off these glaciers in the decade 2010 to 2019 doubled relative to the previous decade. Our more recent research shows that in the last 4 years, the amount of water lost has doubled yet again.
But of course, that's not all.
These glaciers, in addition to Robson Glacier, are also getting darker. A darker surface, such as the shirt I'm wearing here, if I went out into the sun, it would actually absorb more energy than if it was a bright surface. So glaciers behave in the same way. And we can show in many cases that this darkening is due to the loss of multi-year snow high up on the glacier, and also, unfortunately, more recently, impurities delivered by wildfire activity.
Wildfires like the one that devastated Jasper in 2024 aren't just cultural and economic tragedies, but also environmental catastrophes on a scale most of us don't understand.
If you care about water, you should care about glaciers. Any way that you can either warm up the summer or cause these surfaces to become darker, you're going to accelerate and enhance the melt of the existing snow and ice. And so if we think about our way of life, a lot of it really hinges on hydrology.
So problems up here might impact us differently depending on where we live. But make no mistake, glacial changes will impact us, just as our actions impact glaciers. How so? Check this out.
During 2021, the summer of 2021, we had experienced a so-called heat dome. This is a atmospheric phenomena where extremely high pressure system descends and is stationary. Those temperatures were about 10 to 12 degrees warmer than average. And for a period of 5 to 6, 7 days, on top of that, we actually had a strong convective system, so a large thunderstorm not just one particular hazard, but a whole compounding nature to cause this cascade of effects such as widespread flooding, channel erosion, and the need to evacuate people from the park itself.
Brian now answers your inevitable question.
It becomes a little bit more complex for compounded events, but it is safe to say that the heat dome, really setting the stage for this particular event, was caused by human-induced climate change. There has been some speculation that the intensity of the convection was enhanced by wildfires that were occurring to the south of Mount Robson. Pyrocumulonimbus is a phenomena where a wildfire can start to generate its own weather and also have severe convective activity associated with that.
Like the economic issues we've already discussed, the environmental challenges we face are multifaceted and compounding. Though we often point to one big fire or one big flood and say, this is the problem with climate change, the reality is the fires and floods are actually the consequence of hundreds of smaller problems we've overlooked or just decided to ignore. And we can't ignore the climate anymore. After all, climate change isn't just a threat to Martins, but also an issue that threatens to dramatically worsen our cost of living crisis, making everything from housing to cars to food more expensive. Which brings us to this point.
The planet's going to be fine. The actual environmental conditions on the planet are changing, so there will be winners and losers, and humans might be the losers.
And Dr. Kate Moran should know. In addition to being an educator and ocean engineer, Kate has also advised the White House on science and climate policy.
It was a time in the United States where there was incredible respect for scientific knowledge. I mean, the executive branch of the White House and also Congress understood the importance of science, not just for solving problems, but also that by investing in science and research and knowledge, you grow the economy. That it is the foundational piece that has made the U.S. one of the most innovative countries that have ever existed.
But America, as you might have heard, is turning away from science.
And when they pull back, it's going to be a big gap. Like, we have to defend the science that we do. We have to grow it. We have to fill those gaps. I see the international science community as being the most important diplomats on the planet right now.
Kate argues that this is a major opportunity for Canada.
We may be able to step in and fill that gap. We certainly can't do it for the long term. I mean, Canada's 10% of the GDP of the US, but I see it as an opportunity. We're just going to turn it up. Do more science.
But what if this is a long-term problem? What if America not only stops researching the climate, but also stops sharing the data that it already has? Dr. Brian Menounos offers one possible consequence.
I would say that anytime that countries aren't sharing observational data, it's unfortunate in a way that listeners may think about when they pull out their smartphone and they look to check what the weather is. A lot of those current conditions, those are also ingested into a model for how the weather is going to be the next day. And science proceeds by having free and open access to data sets. And whether one was in a trade war, whether one was dealing with conflicts, I will say as a scientist that it is critically important to have open and accessible data, which ultimately helps not only decision makers, but also the general public.
That impacts our understanding of what's happening to glaciers, to hydrology, to the climate, and to so many facets of our environment. But as Dr. Kate Moran explains, it also means
the monitoring in the ocean, really important for climate change, but clearly for weather forecasting, is an economic hit. If you do not have that, you're going to destroy industries. You're going to destroy communities. It's going to be a huge economic hit by shutting down that information.
That's an issue. It's potentially another layer of economic uncertainty, potentially another problem demanding an answer.
And that has implications. It has implications on economic growth.
Dr. Brian Menounos is right. The unforeseen curveballs are making the problems we face, the lives we live, harder and harder. And how much worse might the climate problem become? Dr. Kate Moran says.
I tend not to go to the dire part, and that is because we're an incredible species in terms of our responsiveness. Right now, we're acting stupid. We know climate change is happening. We know the solution, and we have not learned how to alter the behavioral response collectively to actually do those things.
And we need to, according to former Prime Minister Kim Campbell.
The military have recognized this, for decades now. So do we think we're going to keep global stability and peace if those who are suffering most from the effects of climate change are not the ones whose economies have contributed most to it, and how collaborative are they going to be with us, and how friendly are they going to be with us.
In other words, our security problems might get much, much worse without addressing the climate issue. But so too might other environmental issues. Wait, there's other environmental problems?
I lament that it has become so much about climate change. I would almost argue the policy that underlies almost every other policy. Our land and water and air is what produces everything that we have.
Former federal Conservative cabinet minister Monty Solberg is absolutely right. Why? Because a changing climate is just one factor, along with habitat loss, pollution, the exploitation of wildlife, and invasive species, that is causing the rapid decline of biological diversity. Biodiversity?
Simply put, it's the variety of life on Earth.
Dr. David Cooper has helped oversee the Convention on Biological Diversity, a United Nations body that works to coordinate global efforts to protect biodiversity.
Life on Earth, in the broadest sense, depend on biodiversity and the ecosystems that biodiversity makes up.
And as David adds,
the bad news is that in most parts of the world, it is declining, and it's declining at all levels.
Here's the issue. Scientists have analyzed Earth's record-keeping system, fossils, to understand how often natural selection creates natural diode, what's known as the background extinction rate. Their answer, one species goes extinct per million species years. What is our current extinction rate? It's between 1,000 and 10,000 times higher than the planet's background extinction rate, the natural selection, if you will, which is a big spread, but at either extreme, it's still bad news. Consider this. For species that disappeared during the last century, their loss should have taken 800 to 10,000 years to occur, not the 100 years that it actually took. And that's according to a study that used a, quote, conservative background rate of 2 extinctions per million species years. But again, our very best case extinction rate scenario isn't double the background extinction rate. It's 1,000 times the extinction rate. And that's probably why almost half of every monitored species is either decreasing in population or range or both. In fact, the Living Planet Index reports a catastrophic 73% drop in the average global wildlife population from 1970 to 2020. Is this a Canadian problem, you ask? Yes. Of the 50,500 species we monitor, the federal government says 1 in 5 are facing some risk of extirpation, and over 2,000 are at a high risk of national disappearance. More than 500 species are legally listed as at risk by the federal government, including the iconic snowy owl, which has seen more than a 40% decline in its population over the last quarter century. For all these reasons, many scientists believe we're entering a period of mass extinction, where up to 3/4 of species may disappear over a few million years. There have been 5 such events, with the most famous, of course, being the one that whacked the dinosaurs. If we're entering a 6th mass extinction, unlike past extinction events, this one is human-caused, scientists tell us. But that is, of course, a debate, and frankly, not a particularly helpful one. Why? Because the why distracts from the real issue. Unnatural natural selection at a rate well above the background extinction rate means only one thing: biodiversity loss.
The Earth is the context for all life, including human. That's where the atmosphere is, that's where the weather we have comes from, that's where the water we drink and the food we eat comes from. Inside that is the human dimension, our species, which shares the world with many, and then inside human society is our social values and our economy. Those are nested inside what it is to be human, which is nested inside the world. And the idea of elevating the economy or human preferences for use above that context is why we have an environmental crisis in the 21st century.
While we can change our trade partners, build more homes, fund a military to defend our nation, and mitigate the impacts of climate change, we can't withstand the loss of biodiversity.
We're all part of this web of life on Earth. More connections there are, the more stable the whole system is. As we start to lose little pieces, then now instead of a web, it becomes a line or a chain. And then suddenly that system is really vulnerable to any change that might happen.
Biologist Dr. Victoria Lukaszuk is right. And as you now understand, change is happening fast on oh so many fronts, which doesn't bode well. Even still.
Environment has been sometimes described as a full stomach issue. People have to have full stomachs before they start caring about the environment. And you can see that in many parts of the world where if there's terrible poverty or suffering, that people have very little interest in environmental policy.
Sam Sullivan is the former mayor of Vancouver and a political conservative. But above all else, Sam's a realist, argues pollster Sashi Curl.
These decisions are very much rooted in a matrix that starts with your home economics. Can I afford my rent? Can I afford to feed my children? Am I worried about having a job next year? It's a much tougher sell. So I would agree with Sam on that front.
In other words, the present shouts and the future whispers.
I think it is abstract to us until it happens to us.
Barbara Cartwright is a celebrated animal welfare advocate, and she believes extinction, biodiversity loss, is hard to comprehend. Consider the extinction of the western black rhinoceros.
See everybody writing on social media and in the news about how terrible it was that this last rhino had died, but people have been sounding the bells for decades that that's exactly what was going to happen, and we just kept letting it happen. But then everybody, the average person, seems to get on board with this. I'm not questioning whether they were really feeling grief about it, but this terrible grief that it had happened, but they never stood up to make it stop.
Why did we do nothing?
Whether it's extinction or it's cruelty, we don't stand up to make it stop. We don't vote on this issue. People don't go to the polls on it, so the government doesn't have to make change.
Barbara passionately believes we need to solve our environmental problems before they get worse than they already are. But she adds,
the issues facing our environment, where we live, our world, our home, is monstrous. It's so much easier to watch Netflix.
Pollster Sashi Curl agrees.
If a consumer market, for example, made it very easy to take action on issues of understanding, respecting, preserving, enhancing nature, if those were easy decisions, I think we'd be taking them.
So that's an issue. In fact, everything we've discussed here is definitely an issue. They're all serious, complex, compounding, interwoven problems at what's known as the systems level.
The important thing is the numbers are the numbers. The data is the data. You may hate the data. The data may depress the hell out of you based on your own perspective or your bias. The data may just make you want to cry, but it is what it is.
Indeed. So now that we have the facts, the question becomes, can we actually grow our economy and safeguard our sovereignty in a complex, fast-changing, dangerous world, while also addressing other challenges like climate change and biodiversity that didn't just disappear with Trump's trade war or the release of ChatGPT-5?
Wow. I mean, that's ambitious. Maybe, I think we should try.
We should always try.
And no one knows what the future is. We know what the trends are, but nobody actually knows what the future is. So even if, objectively judged, let's say on the climate, we've baked in so much climate change that no matter what we do, we're going to have problems. Yes, that's true. But all the problems are forecasts. What if we did everything we could, and maybe it works out a little better than we thought? But doing nothing guarantees the bad outcome you don't want. Doing something gives you the chance of an outcome you want. And that's all human affairs have ever been. Even when we were wandering around the savannah, trying not to get eaten, people didn't just say, oh God, there's lions out there, I give up. They kept going. And they found a way to protect their families and to move ahead. So there's lions out there right now. So don't give up, keep going. And that's the essence of the human condition, is keep going.
And look, I know these problems seem overwhelming.
It's complex. Our brains don't like change. They like things to be predictable, and there's a lot going on. And I think we're all feeling it. We're feeling like we can't keep up, that things are changing very quickly, but also a whole bunch of things are changing at the same time.
I think the feeling for a lot of Canadians is that the world doesn't make sense anymore.
We're all kind of sitting here worried and scared. And so if we can just take that first step, look at that person across the aisle, be curious about what's going on in their life, and ask them a question. That's all we need to do.
Exactly.
No one is going to be able to come up with a perfect solution in the beginning. I think what we hope is that you're going to sort of push things further a little bit down the road until they become sort of the status quo and we can really make some big change. And sometimes history looks like that, and then all of a sudden there's like a fundamental sea change. We've seen this on a range of stuff around human rights around the world. There's a different type of urgency with the environment.
And we do need to act with a sense of urgency, and not just for the environment, but for each other. But in the doing, we need to work across systems and with different skill sets to learn, think, create, and simply do better.
We need a solution that's going to work in the context of a trade war, but also going to help solve climate change. That's going to work in the context of a mental health crisis and also be a valuable economic solution. We need to be observant, which young people are. We need to be connecting the dots, which young people are more capable of doing. But again, they're more willing to experiment, more willing to get outside the box, try new things that have never been tried before. And in a context of multiple crises, that's what we need.
We're in better shape than most places in the world for a number of reasons. Some to our credit, but some are just a matter of dumb luck.
Canada is the best country in the world. We are a massive geography. We're diverse. We've got historic challenges that we're still trying to remediate and to build and learn from. It's not an easy mix. By gosh, it's worth fighting for. Students watching this, you're inheriting the greatest country in the world, but with a few challenges we're leaving you. So hopefully tackle them with passion and with a sense of purpose.
And if I may, that purpose requires a bit of empathy and a willingness to dig deeper and go further. After all, finding solutions is the easy part. Creating solutions that can unite and endure, that's a much taller task.
What I have come to really appreciate is the importance of creating and protecting the conditions in which we in society can move forward and attack really difficult problems together. The problems, especially the big problems that are arising, are increasing in number and complexity at an exponentially faster rate than our ability and competence and capacity to solve them. That only compounds a problem that we've always had in free and democratic societies, and that is the problem of generating consensus around A, what the problems are, the big ones that we should care about together, and B, how we solve them.